right, my darling.
Yeah. No, it's okay.
All right.
Just look at for a sec.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good enough.
Okay.
Okay. So the precept. The precept that we're working with here. Aware of the suffering caused by sensual, sexual, physical misconduct. I take the precept, I vow to take the precept, to not exploit, take advantage of, etc., to not act out in that space. You know? And of course, as Susan so beautifully discussed, so it begins with our relationship with our own bodies and the non-harm of our own bodies in the space, the taking care, the respect. And but there's this question of other beings. There is this question of other beings and respecting other beings. And of course, with all of these precepts, we can go, well, I'm certainly not going to kill anyone. I don't do that. I'm certainly not going to steal from anyone. I'm certainly not going to hurt someone physically, sexually. I would never do that. Who would ever do that? Right? Of course, we're not going to do that. Yeah? And yet, we look around the world, we don't have to look very far, and we see that it happens. All of these things, we see all of these precepts broken in very profound ways, don't we? Yeah. And when it comes to sexual misconduct, how painful it is to see this happening. Even where we would least expect it to happen. A father would never do that. An uncle would never do that. A therapist would never do that. Certainly, a Dharma teacher would never do that. A lama, a Tibetan lama, of course, would never do that. And yet we see it done. We see it. If you're fortunate enough to not have been close to seeing it, that's so good. I have seen 4 Dharma teachers, 4, who I've worked with, not just read about, work with, act out in that space and sleep with students. So often it happens in a position of power, not a position of power. 4 times, teachers that I trusted, teachers who apparently had relatively deep meditation practice, teachers who'd practiced for years, act out in that space. And of course, we could say, oh yes, it's the patriarchy and it's always men who do that. Well, mostly it is, but I had a nun. Susan and I were teaching a retreat, and we're not teaching a retreat, we're meditating on a retreat. And a senior nun one time put a note under my door, a seductive, provocative note under my door, under the door of my kuti. A senior nun. it's so, things that could never happen, things that would never happen. How could they possibly happen? And they happen. This is a very powerful energy, this sensual sexual energy. It's a very powerful energy. That the management of that energy can go awry. We've seen it. We've seen it. We've seen it. And it's so heartbreaking. Susan and I have met. One time we met with 5 women who had been seriously sexually abused by a Dharma teacher. And we've seen the pain years later of these women still trying to recover from the horror of that. Seeing how they were not even able to get back into the Dharma after that, that they were so disillusioned and so hurt. So we've been close to it. We've seen it up close and personal. Some of these things, when we see them up close and personal, they register at another level. Yeah, yeah. And so what do we do with all that? I think that, this is one of these precepts that we just need to look into the more subtle nuances of it within ourselves. You know, to be really mindful that there are powerful energies here within us that need to not be acted out, even in subtle ways, with seductive energies, with energies that exploit, that take advantage of, that dominate, in the workplace. We hear about in the workplace where a boss would never do that. The bosses do that, etc., etc. It's just really taking a closer look. How are we with that? How are we in this space? And what are the real principles that underlie it? Of course, these precepts are also connected with some of the other precepts. Am I taking what's not given in that space? Is there something really addictive going on in that space, which would connect with the 5th precept, which we'll get to down the road? How is that energy living in me? How is it? And I think the 2 principles that underlie this too, and on a very basic way, is there a respect and honoring of the other being, of other beings in general, a deep respect, that other beings with feelings, other sentient beings, want to be happy just like me, have powerful energies and needs and wishes and desires in them just like me, don't want to be taken advantage of just like me. A deep honoring of the other. So much of these precepts is about a deep honoring of ourselves and the other, not wanting to harm ourselves, really not wanting to harm the other. And the other is just a much deeper self-honesty in terms of our motivations, our complex motivations, our tendency to rationalize in complicated ways sometimes to get some of our needs met. We're not beyond all of that. We need to see the complexity of what it means to be human when we have needs, needs to be loved, need to be seen, need to be held. How is all that working? And also deep honesty with respect to ehipasiko. How does it really feel? How does it really feel in here, my behavior with myself and with others? All we can do is shine the light. Rather than, oh, what's going on out there? is shine the light into our own into our own behavior, our own relationships, yeah, our own relationships, working with our own energies and being deeply honest about them, increasingly honest about them, just increasingly honest. The self-honesty piece is so fundamental with all the precepts, but certainly with this one. Huh? Yeah, yeah. You know, Susan and I are both psychotherapists. We get more training. We get more training in psychotherapy as psychotherapists. A lot of training in that actually about this whole business of feelings that can arise in a therapy relationship and the importance of not acting on some of those feelings that arise. The essential, how essential it is to not act on feelings that might arise in that context. There's no such training in that, no real training in that space for Dharma teachers. No real training. But I think some teachers don't understand the power of the feelings that can arise. You know, when they're in a position of power, when they're being adored in some way. Complex feelings, complex feelings. I think more training needs to happen for Dharma teachers, real training in advance, early on for Dharma teachers. And that doesn't happen. And there's no agency overseeing that either, as there are in psychotherapists. You do that as a psychotherapist, you're going to lose your license, which is great. That doesn't happen for a Dharma teacher. You know, we've seen all four of my Dharma teachers, not one of them apologized either. This makes it even worse, right? None of them even owned it, just denial. You know, it's very, very, very disappointing. You know, it's very disappointing. I hate to even talk about this, right? But it's part of the world. It's part of the world that we live in. Unfortunately, it's still part of the Dharma world. You know, it still happens. And it's one of the great shadows over Western Dharma, in my view. And we need to be awake to it. We need to be awake to it in others, even in teachers that we work with. And we need to be awake to those energies within ourselves. You know, you know, both in terms of anything that might be acting out to hurt another. Yeah. So more discernment, more discernment. Yes. Just yeah. It's more discernment and more care in the space. It's very, very important. Very important. Um, uh, and just to say, Susan and I, our hearts have broken many times working with teachers who could not honor this precept. Yeah. And so within ourselves, please let's honor this precept, however we do that, for the benefit of all beings, for the benefit of all beings. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Thank you. So let's open up. Let's open up. Mm. And when you're ready, lightly closing the eyes and beginning to come in for a landing. Yeah, beginning to come down into the breath, however it is for you. I mean, that was not easy for me to speak about. I'm a little unsettled speaking about that. Brings up sadness for me, and it's a memory for me. Just, however it is for you, just beginning to settle, taking some time with that. And with each breath, settling a bit more. Softening, softening. Softening and allowing, making room for whatever is arising in your meditation practice. As if it all had a right to be there and to announce itself, making room. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much for